Oh howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today we got the full Ultimatum League patch notes, and there's a mixture of buffs and nerfs and all sorts of things in there. I want to go through the things that caught my eye as the most significant, but firstly, I want to start by looking at the other information that was released at the same time. Very easy to miss this stuff. This is the item filter and passive tree information, which has a little bit of stuff in it as well. So firstly, the new passive tree has been revealed. However, this is in a JSON file. Broadly speaking, this is not of any use to you unless you are someone that's been involved in the POE fan tool programming community, in which case you know what you're doing with that. And they'll probably have a new version of Path of Building out about the time that this video is 18 hours old. That will have some bugs in it, but it will get updated and will probably be the way to go for planning your League Start build. So, there's a little bit of information hidden in here. Firstly, there's all the information on the new gems. We sort of already knew that. But then there's the information on the new Divination Cards. All we have about them at the moment is the names. The first thing I notice is that mine is not in there, so that's probably not going to make it till 3.15. But we have Winter's Embrace, Sambodi's Wisdom, so who knows what that'll be, but I'm guessing it could even be for Mortal Ignorance, given that Sambodi's Vow was for one of the Mortal Fragments. And that'd be a little bit of an interesting pun. And then there's a bunch of others here which we'll have to just find out the information about. Broadly speaking, Divination cards have been pretty impactful in the game in recent leagues. The Patient being the one that drove quite a lot of people to running the Armory map last league. We'll see what goes on there. In the Stackable Currency section, there's information confirming the third catalyst, and there's some more information on what that is later in the actual full patch notes. And then there's the other key things that are coming up here is the names of the new Atlas bases and the new item class, Grasping Mail. Don't know anything about what this is other than that it's a body armor, but that could be interesting. So there's a new base item of some description. Sea Glass Amulet we already knew about. That's the energy shield recharge is faster. Amulet, I don't know if that'll be particularly popular or not. I'm kind of expecting not. But some of the stuff that does jump out at me here is Blessed Boots, possibly an alternative choice over two-tones. Apothecary's Gloves, no idea what those are, but it sounds something Flask-related. And Flasks are so powerful in Path of Exile that if it is Flask-related, it'll be really good. And then we have the Artillery Quiver. Again, we're just going to have to see what that does. The big news on this page, though, is that there is no overhaul happening to the Atlas of Worlds. The Atlas layout will be exactly the same as it was in the Ritual League, and so presumably the maps will all stay in the same tier, will all be connected the same way, and so on and so forth. So going through the main patch notes, there's a lot. There is an absolutely staggering amount in here. So rather than go through everything, I actually started recording this trying to do that, and I realized when I was 30% of the way through and it was 45 minutes long already that wasn't the way to go. I thought I'd point out the things that I thought were the biggest. So firstly, we've got all of the new skill gems. One of these I want to draw your attention to because it has really flown under the radar so far. And that one is the Bloodthirst support. Bloodthirst support supports attack skills and only works when you are on low life. It provides a staggering amount of added physical damage with weapons, so 2% of your character's maximum life. So if you've got a character that's got 7,500 life, then this support gem adds 150 flat physical damage to your weapon. Where this truly shines is actually not so much on weapons that are already dealing physical damage, on builds that scale physical damage. Where it truly shines is on builds that convert their damage via specific unique weapons that have powerful conversion modifiers. The weapons I'm thinking of here are the Uber Elder, unique drop Voidforge, and the Prophecy upgrade bow called Doomfletcher's Prism. Both of these, if you've got 150 flat physical damage, both of these will give you something like 450 flat elemental damage from that, and that's a pretty solid use of a support gem in a lot of cases. So keep your eye on this. It's tricky to use, and you'll need to use it in conjunction with Petrified Blood most likely, but I do think there's a lot of power there. Additionally, Petrified Blood, I've seen a really good video going around, and I will put a link to it down in the description below, that describes the exact mechanics of this skill well. So in terms of other things here, there's some discussion of the Vaal Reliquary Key. Now, the Vaal Reliquary Key is an interesting little addition to the game. There have been 2 Reliquary Keys before, and each of them have been different. The Legacy League introduced what was generally called by players the Legacy Keys at the time. These were a lottery ticket. The vast majority of the time, they would give you, actually, every time you use them, they would give you an item that had been removed from Path of Exile for balance reasons at some point in the past. If you got staggeringly lucky, you get a pre-nerf Chevron's Wrappings. You could get a pre-nerf Kaum's Heart. You could get an increased item quantity support. You could get a Eternal Orb. But the vast majority of the time, what you would get would be something like a pre-buff Moon Sorrow. Moon Sorrow is not particularly considered a powerful endgame item now, but the earlier version of it that was discontinued around about Talisman League was absolutely terrible. And so you would get a pre-buff version of Moon Sorrow that you would then go, oh, yuck, what a waste of a lotto ticket. So that was the usual outcome when you used the Legacy one. Then with the Delve League, they thought, all right, well, why don't we try something different? No lottery aspect to it. Instead, we're going to put all of the unique items that can't drop in normal gameplay into the Reliquary Key. All the ones from Path of Exile's history that that can't be accessed in just normal mapping in the core game. And all of them had equal weighting. So if you were lucky, you'd get a Headhunter. If you were unlucky, you get something like a Talisau's Sign. The vast majority of time you got unlucky, but all of the items did have an equal chance. So for every person that got a Talisau's Sign, for every person that got a Beric's Grip, there was someone getting a Headhunter or a Zerfi's Last Breath. So that was the second incarnation of the Reliquary Key. The third version is the Vaal one. And this will give you a Vaal-themed unique item. Now, a lot of players have said that this is going to be rubbish because none of the Vaal-themed unique items are massive jackpot hits. And they're right, none of them are massive jackpot hits. But there's a bunch of items that are in the 5 to 15 Exalt range in most leagues that will all probably be in this. Some of the ones that come to mind are Atziri's Shield, so Atziri's Reflection, the upgraded shield that requires an extraordinarily rare prophecy that mostly comes from farming Vaal Temple for a Divination card. That's one of the things that you'll get this way. The other 3 that are significant are the Transcendent Jewels, all of which are Incursion upgraded drops. Those all require, I think it's called a Vial of Transcendence, which is a very rare drop from killing the boss of the Temple of Atsuatl. So there's 4 drops that I would call semi-jackpots. But then there's also a lot of other things that do have considerable demand all through the league. Things like the Coward's Legacy Belt, that are always a couple of exalts throughout the whole of the league. So for this reason, I think the Vaal Reliquary Key will less often be a disappointment than the previous Reliquary Keys, but it will not be a super lottery ticket. It's just a lower variance thing. It's the rarest Reliquary Key yet because the number of Vaal-themed uniques is smaller. Additionally, if you do pull an item out from the Reliquaries, it will look special. It will look unique and different, and so that's something cool. Next up, there's the Veiled Chaos Orb. This goes into what's going to be discussed later when we come to the Betrayal Changes, but this is a much bigger deal than I think most people are considering because of how significant the changes to Veiled items are. What you can do with a Veiled Chaos Orb is you can reforge a rare item that is an actual endgame base item. And then you can force a pretty good mod onto it. So it's sort of like because the top tier of the Betrayal Veiled items are being upgraded, these will be considerably better than normal mods from the normal mod pool. And so it'll be like using a top tier essence on an item. So either a Deafening Essence or one of the Corruption Only essences, in that it will force one very good mod on the item, and then the rest of the item will be random. Now, most of the time that you use this, of course, is going to disappoint. But sometimes those random mods will line up the right way, and you'll have the start of something great. I think that this is something a lot of people will sleep on for a while, until someone will put out a video in the 3rd week of the league about how they bought 1,000 Veiled Chaos Orbs for 10 Chaos each, and then used them on high-level endgame bases, and wound up making themselves 25 mirrors doing that, because I'm sure that will happen. There's a bunch of new vendor recipes. We don't know anything about these, but there'll be a lot of fun speculation happening, and we'll be able to take part in that over the next few days. If you do find one, all I ask is give it 24 hours to abuse it, then report it to the community so that we know. Within 24 hours, you can set yourself up for a league, but then you can also, after you've looked after yourself, you then let the whole Path of Exile community take advantage of that same vendor recipe. Next up, there's a bunch of new little changes that are coming up, but the big thing that comes up here in the Atlas section is that you can now modify the maps that Conquerors of the Atlas occupy. So if Veritania sets up her Citadel in, say, an atoll map, instead of Zana just opening a scoured atoll, you will be presented an atoll that's in a locked crafting window. You can then go, craft it up a bit, maybe decide to keep it easy, maybe decide to make it horrifically difficult, and then you can run it straight away as well. Now, one thing that is important to note is that this will increase the rewards from the normal monsters in that map, but it will only have a small effect on the rewards of the Conqueror of the Atlas themselves. Lastly, there's just going to be some silliness you can do with this. You can use, I think you can use sextants now, I'm not sure on that. You were able to use them in the past, so I think you'll be able to, but you'll be able to use scarabs, which might end up with some silly things like having Einhar along in the Atlas region where Einhar is much tougher than he normally is, having Einhar along for certain for the boss, and also delirium layers. Like if someone just wants to show off, if you've got a build that you think is just crazily good, then by all means make a 100% delirious map that's got a Conqueror in it, roll it to be nasty, Vaal it into a monstrosity, and then go and show off. I do want to know that I do hope that they've done some thorough bug testing on this. And the specific bug that I'm thinking of, that I'm hoping hasn't slipped through the cracks, is if you're running a tier 15 map in a zone that is not the one that's got Vaal Temple in it. From memory, that's what's Vaal Temple in at the moment? It's Lex Proxima, I think. If you're running a map that's tier 15 and not in Lex Proxima, applying a Vaal Orb to it can transform it into a Vaal Temple, conceivably, and I hope that they've thought about that, and that doesn't break the Conqueror encounter. So here's the biggest change, one of the biggest changes of all. The Maven will only witness encounters in the Uncharted Realms Atlas region for the player that created the encounter. This is one of those things that's going to have a massive impact on the League economy. It was already known about, but basically, one of the shenanigans that was used to make a staggering amount of currency by a small number of players last league was running, like you'd have 4 players that would each open up a Breachstone. So you'd run one Zoff's Breachstone, then one Tull's, then one Escher's, then one Ulnatol's, and then each of those 4 players would run their own Uncharted Realms Maven's Invitation the Hidden. And then they would do the same for all of the other Uncharted Realms encounters. This essentially gave them 4 times, if it was 4 players, 4 times the rewards that a player operating by themselves would get. And it created a situation where these groups were creating so much demand for the Cortex unique map that the Cortex was just not economical for a solo player to run at all. So that was what this change was aimed at fixing. I think it was a needed change, but it's going to have collateral damage. And that collateral damage is going to be that it will be much harder to secure all of the pieces you need to run your own Uncharted Realms and get those powerful Atlas Ascendancy points early. So for instance, getting the 4 synthesis maps in order to unlock Maven's Invitation the Forgotten is going to be a lot harder because you can no longer share those 4 maps with 4 or 5 other players. You need to do them yourself. And if those other players want to do this encounter, they're also going to need to do it themselves. I think this is going to cause some of those maps to get very expensive early on. So keep an eye on that. I would not be shocked to see all of the synthesis maps at 2 exalts or so as a result of this. Also note that Zana missions are being nerfed somewhat, but I don't think this is going to matter much in this way because Zana's synthesis maps and Zana's other special maps don't assist with getting Maven witnesses anyway. So, Ritual is being added to the core game. They have heard the feedback about deferred items being put into deferral hell forever, and they are changing that. There's an 8% chance to encounter ritual altars everywhere, and you can also increase that in Haywark Hamlet. Otherwise, I think ritual changes will be... I want to test it out. I want to give it a bit of a shot in the new league. I think most players will probably skip rituals in this league once they get really powerful, but early on, do rituals. When it's league start, you should do them because they are pretty lucrative at league start. It's just that by the time the economy starts getting flooded by other things, they won't remain that way. Lastly, ritual bases. Something needs to be said about these things. There's, I think they're called Stormrider boots, the accuracy stacking boots. There's the Archdemon Crown. There's the Blizzard Helm. These are going to be staggeringly rare this league, especially if you want them at high item level, high enough to roll premium modifiers on them. Item level 85 and 86 ritual bases are going to only be possible to acquire by using multiple Cirrus exclusive Watchstones, and then forcing rituals onto maps using ritual vessels. There is definitely a play style in this that will be powerful, and I think that some players will find a way to really profit from it. But I would not plan a build that wants to use something like a Blizzard Crown, unless you're quite happy to deal with a much lower item level Blizzard Crown. Harvest changes, this has been beaten to death. Harvest is still going to be the most powerful form of crafting in the game. Unfortunately, because of the nature of Harvest and the way that it is so much better at improving an already good item than it is at being used on a bad item, Harvest is essentially going to be mandatory if you're participating in the Trade League to join one of the service trading discords. They are going to be pretty much essential because Harvest crafting is just so much more powerful than anything else you can do in the game in terms of crafting items. And yes, that is after all the nerfs. The nerfs are considerable, but Harvest was so incredibly powerful that even the somewhat gutted Harvest that exists is still more powerful than fossil crafting. It's still more powerful than the core crafting orb system. So, going on from there, there's a bunch of changes to where items that were introduced in a specific league now drop. So some of these are good, some of these are bad. I'm not looking forward to Delirium Orbs being exclusive to Delirium encounters. I think Delirium Orbs are one of those things that they were too rewarding in the last few leagues, but that's been nerfed. They're something that is essentially, in a lot of ways, they are the end game. Once your character outgrows tier 16 maps. Now, outgrowing tier 16 maps will be a lot slower without Harvest in the equation. With the post-Harvest nerfs and with a bunch of other changes that have happened. But I do think that there'll be a good 50,000 players that can comprehensively outgrow tier 16 maps by the end of maybe the 3rd or 4th week of the league. And with Delirium Orbs potentially seeming they're going to be scarcer, I think that's going to be a real feel-bad because where do you go next once you hit that point that tier 16 maps, you've outgrown them? On the flip side, things like Stygian Vices, I don't really mind seeing them as almost exclusively rewards from Abyssal Depths encounters. Broadly speaking, I think that the consumable items, and particularly content, should not be locked this way, although clearly for at least the start of 3.14 it will be, but equipable items is fine to have them locked. Abysses, there's a bunch of interesting changes, but the main one here is that rare Abyss jewels from Abyssal Troves will use the well-rolled modifier system. So this is interesting in that this is an attempt to improve identifying items at the expense of, it's basically to close some of the gap between identifying an item and crafting an item. The key thing here is that we don't know yet whether these rare Abyss jewels that drop from Troves, we don't know how well-rolled they'll be. There have been different tiers of well-rolled used in the past. Heist was the league that introduced it, and it was really apparent in Heist. Any time that you run a grand heist, it's really apparent that the rare items are well-rolled. You look at them and you're like, okay, that's got 3 tier 1 modifiers on it, and they synergize with each other, and then it's got 3 bad mods on it. Whereas with the well-rolled items that came up in ritual encounters, you would find things that were a lot weaker than that. They were still significantly better than what you would expect just by using a Chaos Orb on an item, but they weren't amazing. So it'd be really interesting to see whether there's differing tiers for these rare Abyss Jewels. There's also a few new Abyss Jewels modifiers, but I don't think they're all that significant. Blight Changes are interesting. You can now Vaal a blighted map and potentially make an 8-mod monstrosity out of it, which is something that should be a lot of fun. But interestingly, these are going to be the way that the Tainted Oils will drop. Tainted Oils are going to be incredible. The reason for that is that Tainted Oils can be used to anoint corrupted items. So if you wanted to anoint a gold, and teal anoint, I'm not sure what the gold, teal anoint is off the top of my head, and you wanted to anoint that onto an item that was already corrupted, then you would need to spend your 2 gold and your 1 teal oil, but you'd also need to throw in a Tainted Oil into the mix. We don't yet know if there is a vendor recipe for Tainted Oils. It may just be that vendoring 3 gold oils grants one, and that may be the best way to get them. But I do think it'd be interesting if these are now the chase loot from blighted maps. Anyways, we're going to have to find that out through playing. The key thing that makes me excited about Tainted Oils, though, is that there are a number of divination cards that grant corrupted versions of powerful unique amulets. The one that comes to mind is I can't think of the name of the card, but it drops from Forge of the Phoenix, and it's a divination card for the powerful amulet Zoph's Blood, which will have 1 Vaal implicit on it. Well, in conjunction with Tainted Oils, you can then turn that into something that's a bit of a monstrosity by anointing perhaps Constitution on it. Or maybe you want something that's more damage projection oriented, you might anoint Tribal Fury on it. All sorts of options there, and I think it's going to breathe some life back into those. In particular, Vol's Devotion. If there is a strong Vol's Devotion build again this league, and there was certainly one in the last league, then the divination card for Vol's Devotion will be in much more demand because the Tainted Oils will solve its big problems. The other thing that is getting better with Tainted Oils is the unique necklace that drops from the Twins encounter. The Twins is sort of the capstone of the Heist League, and it always drops this necklace. The necklace is always corrupted, and the reason it's corrupted is so that you can't apply Divine Orbs to it, because it has a wide range in rolls. It has 3 unique rolls, which is a modifier to your maximum lightning resist, your maximum cold resist, and your maximum fire resist. These are in the range -3 to +3 each. So there's 343 different roll combinations you can get. If you get a well-rolled Leadership's Price, then using a Tainted Oil on it to add an anoint could be really strong, and that may make an item that no one really cared about in 3.13 into something pretty good. The other thing that'll be great with Tainted Oils is anointing the Critical Strike Unarmed Talisman unique. I think it's called Rigwald's Curse, I think. Maybe it's Rigwald's something, but it's a necklace, it's Critical Strike oriented and unarmed combat oriented, and it is very good in conjunction with Face Breakers. It has never been available anointed before. So all of that comes from the Blight Changes. Betrayal Changes. These are pretty big. So modifiers that are unveiled through June are more powerful than before. Previously, when an item was unveiled, the veiled modifier would be equal to the highest tier modifier available on the crafting bench. Actually, that wasn't true. Sometimes you got the lower tiers as well. Now the modifier being unveiled no longer counts as a crafted modifier, which means it's like it's been Exalted Orb slammed onto it, and it will be stronger than any craftable veiled modifier. So this will be really interesting. I think that there's going to be some really monstrously powerful items that are going to start life with a veiled Chaos Orb or with a veiled item that drops through June. You'll still be able to obtain progress towards unlocking craftable versions of these veiled mods. However, progress towards unlocking craftable versions of these mods is slightly faster, and many crafts have had their worst tier removed. There's also changes to the Mastermind. Now, I was actually brainstorming this on stream with a few people last night, and the one that has me most excited, because we don't have the hard details on this yet, but when you kill the Mastermind, you will get the rewards from everyone in the syndicate at the time, but you'll get them 1 tier higher than they currently are. And if they're currently at tier 3, you'll get a tier 4 version of those rewards, We don't know what those tier 4 versions can include, but the one that I'm most excited by is the possibility of Jorgen in Research. Jorgen in Research at tier 1 turns an amulet that you provide, an amulet that cannot be fractured, cannot be synthesized, cannot be influenced. It will turn that into a talisman, or that is a tier 1 talisman. At tier 2, turns it into a tier 2 talisman. At tier 3, turns it into a tier 3 talisman. It sort of stands to reason that if they follow that pattern, it'll turn into a tier 4 talisman when you get Jorgen as 3 stars in Research, and then you go and kill the Mastermind. But tier 4 talismans aren't in the game at the moment, and they were much stronger than tier 1, 2, and 3 ones. So that's something that could be very exciting. They will have 2 talisman exclusive implicits instead of 1. So that could be very, 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 very strong. Or alternately, there could have been changes to Jorgen that make that less relevant. Additionally, Leo in Research has me interested as well. Currently at tier 1, Leo in Research will apply a Blessed Orb to an item, at tier 2 a Divine Orb, and at tier 3 an Exalted Orb. What comes next? I don't think it's particularly clear. One possibility is that Leo will give you 2 choices for a mod to add to an item. One possibility is that it will be like an Exalted Orb, except with a bias towards higher tier results. Maybe it'll be an influenced Exalted Orb. We'll have to find that out, but that's something I guess we'll work out over time. Yeah, and so the other thing that's interesting is that you may get Winged Scarabs from tier 4 intervention encounters, but all of this, again, is still speculation. We don't have any hard information there. Lastly, various craftable veiled modifiers have been rebalanced. Please read below. What this means is that the trigger wand has been nerfed. It's still so good that every build will want to use it, though. Bestiary Changes. So there's 10 new Bestiary recipes, of which 7 are known and 3 are not. The 7 that are known, 6 of them function like an Exalted Orb, but can only be applied to items with a specific influence. These ones are interesting in that they consume 2 red base and 2 yellow base, which will help deal with some of the imbalance in red to yellow base in the economy as a whole, and will be something that a lot of people who go hard on targeting Ironheart missions will be thankful for. Additionally, there's the nerf to beast splits that we knew about, and finally, there is a complete and utter demolition of the strategies of multi-box beast farming. Basically, this multi-box beast farming has crossed the line where GGG consider it cheating, but they also, they can't, it's not really an enforceable thing because the strategies that players that are using it, I won't go into all the details, but the strategies players are using to do it, they are technically cheating, but they can't be detected. In any case, a bunch of people have been getting 6 times the benefit of beast recipes that they should have been. Those people are going to lose all of those extra base, or at least they're going to have to massively slow down their farming. So that's going to be a good thing. Okay, Breach Changes. This is one of the biggest changes, and it's something that people weren't expecting until the announcement of the league. But blessings of the various Breach Lords can upgrade their Breach Stones. The main use case for this will be there's a number of bits of content in the game that can drop enriched Breach Stones, so they're the ones that have 2 ranks up on them. You're going to want to pick up those, you're already picking up the enriched ones, but you're just going to want to use one of the blessing on them to turn them into a pure Breach Stone. Pure Breach Stones are just miles better than the lower tiers, and so if you've got Breach blessings left after that, then you can use 2 of them on your tier 1 ones. That's a huge improvement. Trade League players don't use blessings on a standard Breach Stone, at least at first. We'll have to see how the economy works out, but you will want to be using these blessings on the ones that have already got 1 or 2 upgrades on them already, because there won't be enough blessings going around. Lastly, for Trade League players, this is going to make upgrading the various Breach uniques more expensive. So, for instance, something like Hand of Wisdom in Action, a very powerful unique claw that's also very, very niche and very, very common in Esh Breach Stones. That comes from getting Hand of Wisdom in Action. No, There's Hand of Something in Motion first, and then there's Hand of Wisdom in Action. Howler is the upgrade. Hand of Thought in Motion, I think it is the lower tier. You need to find that, and you need to find an Esh Blessing. But the Esh Blessing that you're using there has a big opportunity cost now in that it prevents you from upgrading a Breachstone. And so I think that this is going to make it more expensive to purchase any of these upgraded versions of the uniques, but I don't think it'll be staggeringly expensive either. Delirium Changes, big nerf to Delirium encounter loot, although not an absolute gutting. And also, there's been a number of changes to Cluster Jewel notables. Mostly, these Cluster Jewel notable changes are targeting Aurabots. Aurabots will still be brokenly powerful. They'll still be one of the most powerful builds in the game, mostly because Prism Guardian has not been touched. So Prism Guardian will still be as broken as it's always been. It's actually a contender with Headhunter for the most powerful item in the game. And also, there'll be a little bit of a haircut on some of the amount of aura effect you get, but an Aurabot plus a normal character will still be more strong than 3 normal characters. Delve changes have been discussed to death, but basically casual delving will be better and very deep delving will not be. Essence changes are interesting. Essences will see a lot of use early in the league, I think. I think they'll fall off still because they're just not as powerful as what Harvest empowers later on. But the thing that's most notable is that all of the Corruption tier essences can only be sourced through essence content now. There's no more getting an Essence of Horror from a Simulacrum. There's no more getting a Essence of Hysteria from a Heist chest. These will only come from using a Remnant of Corruption on an Essence monster. In terms of other changes, the Heist changes are irrelevant because Heist rogues level up so quickly anyway, at least once you start running blueprints, which you can do very early in leveling. Incursion changes, the ability to convert a temple into a tradable object is going to be huge. Just be aware that there will be a lot of scams going around with this. The way the scam is going to work is that someone's going to they're going to keep trying to craft tier 3 corruption chambers in all of their temples, but when they fail and they get a tier 1 or tier 2 and then fail to upgrade it to tier 3, they'll keep those ones in their inventory, and then they'll put the ones that have got a tier 3 one up for trade, and then they'll do a switcheroo. So make sure that if you're trading for a Temple of Atzoatl Chronicle, that you read it very carefully. And if you do see someone try and scam you, report their in-game account to GGG support. Okay, there's been a lot of changes made to the Temple of Atzoatl, more monsters, a couple of other loot changes. These aren't massive changes, but they're going to, generally speaking, make the temple a little bit more lucrative. One thing that'll be interesting, there's a couple of Temple of Atzoatl specific couple of Temple of Atzoatl specific divination cards that are quite good. I'll be interested to see if these changes result in more of those dropping. There's a bunch of Legion changes, nothing really significant. It's mostly about incubators. The only thing that really comes to mind is that Cartographer's incubators can now drop maps with Delirium layers pre-applied to them. Metamorph changes, there's 3 new catalysts, so there's the 2 we already knew about, speed and critical modifiers. There's also one for physical and chaos damage mods, which could be quite good. Lastly, Metamorphs created in Tane's lab now deal 10% more damage and have 80% more health. Watch out. It's actually the 10% more damage that's the scarier part. That's going to kill a lot of players, I think, because those Metamorphs can be pretty scary, especially if you put a nasty boss in there. You might find that you might want to put all of your really horrible bosses together, because that way it's not such a big deal. At least as a softcore player, I'm saying this, because then you're not going to have a situation where you lose 3 different Metamorphs because you make a mistake to Katava in one of them, to the Guardian of the Chimera in another, and to say, oh, what's another really deadly boss, to Lunaris in another one. You don't want to have a situation like that. You want to have a situation where those 3 are together and you bring your A game to that fight, and if you do lose, well, you've lost 1 Metamorph encounter, not 3. Perandus changes. I'm interested to see what happens with Perandus coins. I've got a feeling that people might just get to the point of not picking them up at all, because they don't seem to drop in big enough numbers. There's nothing mentioning that they're being desplintered, so I think people may just get to the point of removing all sources of Perandus stuff from their from their loot filters, with the exception of the Divination card, the Cheater, which is obviously a mini Exalt bonanza when you get it. But that's very rare. And then this thing with the changes to scroll fragments removes any floor on the value of Parandus coins as well. Again, I think Parandus is just at that point where unless they remove the stacks that are smaller than 100 and consolidate coins together, I don't think there's any point engaging with the content now. Synthesis changes. Fractured items no longer have a visual effect applied to them. This kind of makes me sad. Mostly because I have a bunch of really horribly glitched looking Vaal Temple maps in Standard now that look really funny but look really ugly as well. Talismans, discussed to death. It's not going to have any impact because your talismans are now strictly vendor for alteration shards, I think. Labyrinth changes we've discussed extensively. I've done a whole video on them. Character balance, there's a lot of different things to discuss here. A lot of them are just small technical changes, and I'm going to skip over all of those. The key things, low life is being changed, and the light radius is now also being adjusted accordingly. Really hope that light radius is quite a bit brighter for low life than it has been in the past, because it's one of those things that makes playing a low life character feel really uncomfortable. There's a bit more precision on how costs and reservations work, and also there's been some changes made that will indirectly gut the interaction of Indigon, the unique helmet from the Uber Elder encounter, with mines. That said, Indigon is still very, 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 very good. Lastly, the Cosprey's Will unique body armor no longer allows you to bypass hexproof on yourself, which seems like it's one of the most random things ever written. But this is designed solely as a Headhunter nerf, but it's one that won't just affect you if you own a Headhunter. It's only going to affect people that do the most extreme min-maxing around Headhunter. What this does mean, though, is that the Temporal Chains Curse Effect helmet enchant is probably dead. Character size is now capped at 100% bonuses. Again, this is something changing for Headhunter, and also potentially for Zerfy's Heart, which I think will see a bit more use than it has in the past. And I'll get to that later on when we're talking about Val Ground Slam. But that's something that is actually a quality of life improvement, because getting your character to 500% increased character size, it's hilarious once. Then you see how much it slows down your computer's performance, and you don't want to ever see it again. Skill balance, minor changes to anger, nothing to talk about really much there. Divergent Berserk is I don't know if it's gutted. I don't think it's gutted completely, but it's no longer the uber powerhouse that it used to be, and neither is Vaal Righteous Fire when we get to that later. Blade Blast has been nerfed. It's still very strong. You can still safely league start Blade Blast, and it will still work well. Blade Vortex, on the other hand, is taking a big nerf, mostly because it's losing multiple things. It's losing damage projection, it's losing damage, and it's losing the duration. This combination might kill a skill entirely, but even if they don't, I think this is the end of Blade Vortex as a meta skill. It may still be good enough to use, but I don't think it's going to be uber. Flesh and Stone, still very good with the nerf. Bladestorm, someone's going to have to theory craft that. I haven't done it yet, but I think it could be quite good. Frostbomb, still very good, despite the nerf. And General's Cry with channeling is still looking very strong. Punishment is still very, very strong. And I actually think this is going to be better than it was in 3.13, despite this what appears to be a nerf here. Punishment is in a really good place with the changes that have been made to low life. And so, yeah, I think Punishment will be seen. You will see a lot of people using Punishment in future. Okay, Seismic Cry is getting a nerf. It's still very good. Wasn't actually yeah, Spell Slinger. I didn't actually realize it supported skills that were granted by items. I'd never thought to try that out myself. But yeah, nothing particularly overwhelmingly exciting there. Carrion Golem's getting nerfed, but it's not gutted. It's still very strong. Toxic Rain, the verdict is still out. If you were wanting to play Toxic Rain, I suggest you still do, but be willing to respec a Caustic Arrow. Caustic Arrow may end up being better. Vigilant Strike has had a couple of nerfs with its interaction with its jewel, and it's still good. It's just not as nuts as it used to be for spellcasters. For any build that was actually using Vigilant Strike to attack, it's at least as good as it used to be. Okay, so we have Vitality, which was buffed into the stratosphere a few leagues ago. It's been nerfed again, but it's probably still good enough to use on a lot of builds. Wave of Conviction is being nerfed, but still has now has more damage that it deals. It might actually even get used as a single skill. Vowel Skills, though, this is the big one. Let's start talking buffs here, shall we? So not every single Vowel skill in this list has been buffed, but a lot of them have, and a lot of them go from terrible to really good. So Vaal Arc is getting minimal changes, but broadly speaking, these are upgrades. Vaal Blade Vortex, though, this is getting nerfed. This is getting nerfed, but it is also recovering a little bit because it's got some more base duration. Overall, I think Vaal Blade Vortex is still in about the same place as the Vaal version of Blade Vortex was before, but the nerfs to Blade Vortex mean that you're not going to be running the skill as much. So I don't think that the buffs to Vaal Blade Vortex will make up for the nerfs to the original skill, even though the buffs to broadly speaking, I think it may be a buff overall. It's doing less damage, but it's got much better duration. Overall, anyways, Blade Vortex has been hurt so much that I don't think that Vaal Blade Vortex can make up for it. Let's put it that way. Vaal Blight, very small change. Vaal Burning Arrow is quite a bit better now, and it was already sort of okay. So Burning Arrow and Vaal Burning Arrow can definitely be something you can build around if you want to. But Vaal Cold Snap has some interesting changes. When you're looking at this, it looks amazing. The hit damage is just scaling up into the stratosphere. But the damage, for the reason you're actually using the skill, the cold damage per second, is only up by 2.25%. A 2.25% buff is still a 2.25% buff, and you'll take it. And also, the hit damage is now, just that little bit more meaningful. This might get used in conjunction with Cruelty support, if assuming that works. That's something we'll have to see people play around with and decide whether it's worth it or not. Next up, we have Vaal Cyclone. This skill is so bad mechanically that the enormous numerical buffs it's getting here, even though it's getting a reduce attack speed, overall it is an enormous improvement in the skill's numbers, but it's still terrible. Vaal Earthquake is looking better. It's sort of been good for a while as well, so Vaal Earthquake is definitely something to have on your radar. What I think you want to think of here is, if you are playing a build that is using Earthquake, then you want to try and just have Vaal Earthquake as like an extra button you can push for an extra burst of damage. Vaal Fireball Minimal Changes. Vaal Flame Blast is getting some interesting little buffs here. Vaal Flame Blast is really hard to describe. You have to play around with this skill, but it's impactful and it's powerful, especially if you can predict where a boss will be standing. Then it can do a staggering amount of damage. It's probably the single highest single target damage skill in the game if you can predict where an enemy is going to go. This just does so much damage that you want to try it out at some point. And yeah, I'll suggest that if you're playing a Flame Blast build, which you probably shouldn't do, then the Vaal Flame Blast is a really good thing to have with it. The one situation that you might want to consider Vaal Flame Blast is on some of the really interesting Elementalist builds that stack the percentage chance for monsters to explode, dealing a quarter of their life as chaos damage. So you can get 20% of that on the unique wand Obliteration, which you can dual wield for 40%, and you can also get it on the large cluster jewel exclusive node Unspeakable Gifts, which gives you 10%, and you can also get that on Megalomaniacs. There is definitely a build that can be done around using Flame Blast and Vaal Flame Blast to start a chain reaction, and then just using these popcorn mechanics to cause enemies to explode, igniting each other using the Elementalist. It's definitely got some potential, and I'll let you think about it if you're interested in doing that. Alternately, instead of going as an Elementalist, you could conceivably do this as an Occultist and use the unique necklace Xerfy's Heart in order to grant your Chaos damage the ability to ignite. Now we have the big ones. Vale Ground Slam. This skill was already good. So Vale Ground Slam is interesting in that it was a massive panic button. You would hit Vaal Ground Slam, and it would stun map bosses. It would even stun Conquerors of the Atlas really reliably. But it wouldn't do all that much damage, and that was because it couldn't be used with all of the Warcry exertions. Well, what you can do now with Vaal Ground Slam is you can exert it as though it was not a Vaal skill. Additionally, it deals a staggeringly large amount of damage. It stuns as though it's dealing even more damage than it's doing. And yeah, basically, the fact that you can store 4 uses of it, you can just go bonk, 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 bonk. This is a really big source of damage that I think a lot of melee builds should consider using. Next, we have Valeisnova, which is getting buffed in pretty much every imaginable way and was already good. This is really going to be strong. This is at its absolute best when used against legions, where your first cast can wake up the whole legion, and then your second cast can kill them all. And to help with that, it's now doing something like 70% more damage than it used to do. 70, maybe it's even 80% more damage than it used to do. It's got a shorter cast time, so it's harder for you to get stunned out of it, and you can store 2 uses of it. So this is going to be really strong. Vaal Lightning Strike I have no experience with. Vaal Lightning Trap has been used as a support skill before, and it's going to be better at inflicting shocks because it just does so much lightning damage now. Vaal Rain of Arrows is getting buffed in every imaginable way. Vaal Reeve is looking even better, and Vaal Reeve, Reeve is mechanically clunky as a skill, but the Vaal version was always good. Vaal Righteous Fire is getting a quite much needed nerf. In fact, Vaal Righteous Fire is actually really getting nerfed hard. Vaal Righteous Fire, I think, is probably not going to get used anymore. It had been so good for a long time that it sort of eclipsed all the other options, whereas now I think we're seeing, if Vaal Righteous Fire used to be a 7 out of 10, we're now seeing a bunch of other things in the 6, 7, 8 range, and Vaal Righteous Fire is being pushed down to a 3. Vaal Power Siphon is looking really good. The thing that immediately comes to mind with Vaal Power Siphon is actually the new version of Sacrificial Heart, which is one of the Incursion Temple uniques. It's not the upgraded version, which is Xerfy's Heart. It's the lower version, and it has a new line that whenever you use a Vaal skill, your power charges increase to full. So that, in conjunction with this, does a lot. But also, just seeing these stats on an assassin are really strong. Just a fair warning though, if you are thinking of playing with Power Siphon, it is a difficult skill to league start, and I would only suggest doing that if you are running with a support character. Vaal Spark Minimal Changes. Vaal Spectral Throw is getting huge buffs. It is increasing its soul cost, but I think overall it's still a big buff. And Vaal Storm Call was already mechanically strong, and it's now getting better. So lots of changes there. Now there's a line here that's confused a few people. Brutality support is changing to support any skill that deals damage. Previously it required the skill to hit an enemy. This is just there, I believe, so that it can support Corrupting Blood. I don't think there's any other reason for that. Basically, this will have no change for all situations in which you would deliberately use Brutality support. This will mean no change. Passive Tree Balance. There's a bunch of small changes, but nothing particularly overwhelming here. And that's really the case everything here except for Chainbreaker. Chainbreaker is one of the mods that's available only on Timeless Jewels, and now it no longer causes you to lose 5 rage when you hit an enemy, up to once per 300 milliseconds. It instead causes your skills to cost an additional 3 rage. This is going to make Chainbreaker plus Berserk pretty much a it's going to be a very dangerous game to play, because once Berserk puts you under 3 rage, you're not going to be able to use skills at all. Not even your movement skills, not even a movement skill that's linked to Blood Magic, or, well, it's now called Life Tap support. So for that reason, Chainbreaker with Berserk is now risky, but Chainbreaker is still strong on its own. And I think it's going to have more of an identity as a skill that you use in conjunction primarily with slam builds. I don't think it's going to be as universally powerful as it was in the past. Corrupted Soul's getting nerfed. It's still really good. And there's a bit of a nerf to Hardened Scars, which is actually pretty considerable, but not that many people were thinking of using it. Next up is the Atlas passive balance. There's a lot of little things here, but I just want to go through the big ones. So there's all the stuff about the changes to Ritual that have been added in here that actually do look pretty good. So Paid in Blood is an impactful 4-point node. So that is looking really good, but this is, it's in Haywark Hamlet. Haywark Hamlet has the Harvest mods, and Harvest is pretty broken, so it's going to be hard to justify taking the Ritual nodes there. Turn's End is not changing much. It is changing a bit, just not all that much. Lex Proxima is getting a bunch of little changes, but Seance is getting gutted. Seance is actually probably still pretty strong. It just added so much additional loot to maps that it was absolutely nuts before. Lex Joris is unfortunately something that has killed one of the videos I posted yesterday. Pathological only has a 5% chance to apply layers of Delirium to maps found in areas, previously 10%. I think Pathological is still good, but it's no longer a great node. And I'm just thinking that Lex Joris in general has gone from being a zone I was mapping in a lot last league to one I probably won't do much in this league. Glenak Cans is being changed around a little bit, but the key thing there is high value targets, which was previously in New Vestia, is getting nerfed hard, and otherwise there's just and face to face is no longer granting more timeless splinters from Legion Generals, which wasn't all that significant, but was something. So a bunch of little changes there, nothing huge. New Vestia has got Votive Horde is being nerfed hard. I no longer think Votive Horde is worth taking. So this used to have the effect of causing Abyssal Troves to drop loot that was 3 levels higher. This meant that it was the easiest way in the game to get item level 86 bases. That's gone. Otherwise, I don't think there's much that's changing of note in New Vestia. Valdo's Rest, as I think everyone knew was going to happen, Diplomatic Escort is getting gutted. Don't know if it'll be good or not. We'll have to find that out. And there's Gut Instincts getting a buff. Lyra Athane, there's less of an impact on the effect of making rarer beasts more common. So again, that's part of the thing with dealing with some of the some of the extreme edge cases of bestiary abuse by organised groups. And then there's a nerf, surprisingly a nerf to Spores on the Wind, which I didn't think was a broken node. I thought it was just a solid one. But anyways, nothing particularly significant here. Of note, because of the Zana mods, I do think that Lyra Athane is looking better than it was last league. Uncharted Realms Neural Pathways now doubles the bonus that it grants to Synthesis map drops, which will be significant, especially with the things I discussed before about how those are going to be really scarce this league. Ascendancy balance is really minor this league. So Berserker's had a couple of little things. Berserker is actually capable of doing physical spellcasting in this league. I'm sure people will try that. I'm not intending to, but I'm sure people will. Gladiator is getting a couple of little things that support physical damage over time as well. Defy Pain is something that is like this is one of those nodes that's really hard to use, and honestly, I just don't know what to think of it. I think it's terrible. This take reflected physical damage equal to your maximum life drawback is enormous. So we don't know how long it takes for Defiance to fall off, but broadly speaking, I think that the drawback on this is too big to use. Oh, and yeah, you can see that. You gain the Defiance for 10 seconds, but we don't know whether it falls off one at a time or all at once. But waiting 10 seconds for all of that Defiance to fall off is too much. And shielding yourself against reflected physical damage equal to your maximum life is really, really difficult. So for that reason, I think Defy Pain is just a complete and utter dud. I'm open to being proven wrong on this, but that's my initial thought. Assassins, Ambush and Assassinate is both getting buffed and nerfed. It now applies to monsters at 50% life instead of 35%, but it does less. Broadly speaking, though, it's not changing all that much. There's a couple other little changes. The Bastion of Elements is getting a nerf of all things in the Elementalist. I certainly unspec'd that on my Elementalist last league because I just realised that whilst it was okay, it wasn't as good as the other options. And yeah, that's basically about it there. Then there's a bunch of things we already knew about. There's the changes to Explodey chests. These are being nerfed pretty hard, but we don't know if they're getting gutted or not. We won't know until the data mine information comes out. Quivers are losing all spellcasting effects, basically. Basically, everything related to quivers that allows you to spellcast is dead. So I don't think you will see casters with bows, except as a meme in the future. Bunch of other little changes. There's the poison and bleed mods that are being changed. I think is going to be a really, really impactful and really painful change for those builds. It may end up pushing poison to the fringes of the meta and bleeding out of it entirely, although I am very open to being proven wrong there. Additionally, there's a bunch of other things that are changing that are all pretty minor things down here, except for the fact that flasks can no longer be obtained from the Fateful Meeting Divination card. Why? Like, that was just one of the coolest things in the last league, was just seeing people turn in Fateful Meeting and get a flask. It was hilarious to see a corrupted flask, and not just a corrupted flask, but an influence flask. These were hilarious. These were weaker than a normal flask, but they just looked so cool, and unfortunately, they are now crangled. I don't see the point in that. I would like to see this one changed. Anyways, in terms of essences, there's a number of changes. The big one being that Screaming Essences can now function like a Chaos Orb, so you don't need a Scouring Orb to use a Screaming Essence, unless the item is currently magic. If it's already rare, you can just throw a Screaming Essence on it. That's going to make early map gearing so much smoother because essences are pretty common in early maps. A bunch of the mods are getting changed in numbers. Deafening Essences of Contempt are getting buffed a bit, and I think this will be the main way that people roll early league physical damage weapons now. A bunch of other little changes through here. Nothing that's really transformative. Essences of Woe are getting better in terms of the energy shield. This is not a reversion of the nerfs that took place around Legacy League, but they're still getting better. And then there's the major, then there's the corruption-only essences that are being changed. The Abyssal Balance changes are pretty small. It's mostly some of the very worst mods are getting better, but it's not like they're becoming great. And then there's a couple of little tiny tweaks to downwards on chaos and physical damage minion nodes. But that's really about it. And nothing all that significant. Cluster Jewel Balances, it's pretty much the best nodes are getting a haircut. Nothing's getting gutted, but a bunch of things are getting small nerfs. It's worth having a full read through there, but there's nothing that's a tremendous nerf and nothing that's being removed completely. Oil changes for blighted maps are going to mean that you're no longer going to use teal oils as much. Although teal oils could be good. If you just want to make your blight maps faster, teal oils are really good. I think people will probably actually start using verdant oils on them. 35% increased experience gain times 3 is a lot. So that's 105% increased experience gain. Then that is affected by your awakening bonus from memory. So instead of 105, that'll be like 130% increased XP. That might actually be enough to really feel meaningful. Crafted Veiled modifier balance has been noted here. The one that matters is the trigger a socketed skill when you use... trigger a socketed spell when you use a skill. This is being nerfed from 4-second cooldown to 8-second cooldown. That's a big nerf, but the mod was so powerful before that it is actually still good at half power. A bunch of small changes to unique items. Nothing really stands out here. Replica Last Resort is getting a nerf, and that's because it's easier to stay at low life. However, it's not a game over nerf for that item. It's just a modest one, and I do think that will still be something intriguing to play around with. Rigwald's Quills no longer works with anything except bows, except bow attacks. It's arrows only. And the Signal Fire also no longer has physical damage added as extra fire. It is physical attack damage. added as extra fire, and so both of those quivers are dead as far as spellcasters go. Number of little changes to the incursions items, nothing but tremendously massive. And of note in the monster changes here, the biggest changes are that allies can't die is being replaced with something broadly similar but less long-lasting, I believe. I will have to see exactly how that works out. But I always liked Allies Can't Die. I liked fighting against it, except for when it didn't work, and it didn't work very often. So, well, sorry, let me rephrase that. It was frequent for it to have significant technical issues associated with it. And when that happened, it was horrible. Like, you know, you'd move into a pack and the screen would freeze up, and then you'd wake up and, you know, you'd crash, and then you'd be in your hideout with 10% less XP. That was a terrible experience, and I think they tried a bunch of things to improve it. They never got it right, so they've changed it for something else. And yeah, like, hopefully this will function in much the same way. It's going to cause nearby enemies to become immune briefly. I don't know what a short duration means. Maybe it's 2 seconds, maybe it's 6 seconds. But if the original monster is slain, then that ends the immunity buff. So this will be functionally similar, but will cause less technical issues because it will clear up. It'll clear up over time. I think it's a good change overall. Teztosh, Hungering Flame, no longer uses his ultimate Molten Strike skill. This was a wrecking ball. Like, Teztosh was just so deadly, and that's been fixed up. Also, there's changes to damage reflection in the Labyrinth and the Racecourse map. Those are gone. And finally, the Vaal Pyramid and Arcade map bosses have had their health increased to bring them into line with other bosses. Vaal Pyramid scares me. That boss is dangerous. That's the trio that's... it's one of the trios that you fight while you're waiting for Dominus to spawn on the Tower of the Scepter of God. And it's a dangerous fight normally. It's going to be worse with more hit points. Next, we have the Xanamons. The ones that matter are the ones at the end. Harbinger is as powerful as it's always been. You pretty much can't lose on this as long as there's demand for Ancient Orbs and Exalted Orbs. If it turns out that Ancient Orb demand falls off a cliff this league because of the changes to how Ancient Orbs are going to work, then maybe that won't be the case. Harvest is obvious. As I said, Harvest is still brokenly powerful. People will still definitely be using this all through the league. There'll be incredible demand for Chaos Orbs because of this. And, you know, so many people will be running just whatever map to go and get Broken Harvest crafts and mass produce powerful items. Heist, on the other hand, is an interesting one. This creates 2 smugglers' caches in a region. This is getting underestimated by everyone. People on Reddit have been saying that this is terrible. I think they're wrong, and I think that this is going to be really, really, really strong if you're using it in Lyra Arthane, where you've got other buffs that improve the value of your smugglers' caches. So you're going to want to do this on Tier 16 maps. Tier 16 maps means that you've got the potential to loot any of the unique contracts that you have unlocked so far. So you need to have done all the pre-quests. Additionally, you need to get... Additionally, you'll get a fair number of blueprints that way, and a small number of them will be fully unveiled. That's going to be a huge factor in just, you know, like a fully unveiled blueprint is easily an Exalt or 2 when you get one, and a standard blueprint, like, they're profitable to run. You know, they're profitable to run if you're buying them at 2 for an Exalt, although you can generally get them at 10 for an Exalt. I think that Heist will actually pay for itself pretty well in this league. I think it'll be a lot better than people give it credit for. I think there will be a lot of people that that fund a Headhunter during week 1, and a big part of their play is running Heist from the Xanamons. There's a bunch of other little changes here, but nothing particularly significant here. Info on where the various new gems come available, PvP changes for the 3 people that still care about that, and then a bunch of bug fixes. Finally, there's a couple of little updates that have been put here. There was one mistake that was added there, but the main one is just a clarification because there was a mistake made earlier on in an earlier version of these notes that Vowel skill gems can still be acquired by corrupting gems. Vowel skill gems, though, are going to be harder to loot than they've been in recent times. They're not going to drop from killing the bosses of corrupted maps. They're not going to drop from a bunch of other random things. They're going to drop from just a few specific spots. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. This has gone on way too long. If you've got any comments or questions, fire away below. Otherwise, I hope you have a good one, and I will see you in Ultimatum. Actually, I'll probably see you before then, because I'm planning to spend tomorrow, some of tomorrow, putting together a guide for the league starter I'm going to use, which will be an Elementalist that uses Reap, and that uses the Elementalist Golem stacking to scale the damage of Reap.